What is up, guys? Andy here from Biohazard Declassified. I hope you're all doing well on this fantastic evening. Today, we've got another episode of the Biohazard Declassified podcast coming up for you. We're going to be talking in the lead up to Resident Evil Infinite Darkness. We're going back in time and we're looking at the initial Resident Evil animated films. There was, I will preface this, there was a film that was released beforehand and before this by the name of Biohazard 4D Executor. It's a 20 minute, it's more of a tech demo for brutally honest. It was only released in Japan, but Resident Evil Degeneration served as the very first feature length Resident Evil movie. It came out at a very interesting time. At this point, I want to say we had Resident Evil, the first Resident Evil come out in 2002. Apocalypse come out, I want to say 2004 time. And I'm pretty sure Extinction had been released up until this point. So you had three Resident Evils, live action Resident Evil films out on the market. But one thing, and we'll go into the production and development of this, but one thing that stands out with Degeneration is it filled a void at that point in time. Screen Gems were obviously doing their things with the Resident Evil live action films, and Capcom took the reins of Resident Evil Degeneration and made a Resident Evil film that was more traditional in the ilk of the games that were released at the time. So, gentlemen, I first want, before we jump into the synopsis of Resident Evil Degeneration, what were your thoughts when this first came out? And seeing the trailers and knowing it was going to feature Leon and Claire after the events of Resident Evil 2 and 4. Let's start with you, Jesse.
I mean, I remember looking forward to this very fondly. It was interesting to see from the live action films because, you know, as kids, when the live action films first came out, like you got really excited for them, and then for me at least, that excitement quickly faded after watching the first one. Like I thought it, you know, I think most people agree, like the first couple of Resident Evil live action films are like good actiony zombie films, but they stray so far from the Resident Evil formula and narrative that, you know, you don't really want to tie them into the Resident Evil universe. So when they announced a generation, like it was the perfect idea. You had series member, you know, like franchise familiar faces coming back with Leon and Claire. It was CG, so it felt more like the video games at the time. So I remember getting really excited to see it, and I remember, I think we rented it. I think I got it from Blockbuster and rented it and watched it, and just absolutely as far as the CGI films have gone thus far, like Degeneration being the first is really special, but it's particularly special to me because, like I said, just being kind of disappointed by the live action films, and then to have this come out, you know, bringing the CGI, familiar characters, everything. It was the perfect thing I think Resident Evil needed at that time to come out. And honestly, it kind of made me wonder even at the time. It's like, why is this not the standard going forward for Resident Evil film? I think live action adaptations of things are usually really cool to see, but Resident Evil being a video game, you almost kind of always want to see it in a familiar formula, and that being CG. So I absolutely loved it as a kid, and it's still a really good film to go back and watch. And I think it's one of the stronger in the CGI series.
And yourself, Matt?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely have to agree. Up until this point, you know, we got the first couple of live action Resident Evil movies, and after the first two, it kind of started going down that hill of, you know, is this Resident Evil? It doesn't feel familiar. So when an introduction of the CGI movie came out, I remember seeing the trailer for it when I was younger. I was absolutely excited. Leon and Claire, both in the same movie, zombies involved again. It was just very exciting. And I think one of the things that's best about Degeneration is it's a very grounded Resident Evil CGI movie. We deal with the T virus, we deal with the G virus. There's a very similar plot. It doesn't go too far off the rails. It introduces just enough new characters to keep the story playing. And it's basically what we wanted for a live action movie in the form of a smaller show-going CGI movie. it was good. It brought that feel back to the classic survival horrors of the Resident Evil games. So I remember being very excited seeing it.
Yeah, and just touching on that point, with the Resident Evil 1, 2, and 3 live action films, obviously it goes without saying the characters in the original Resident Evil weren't real, so they had to use actors to play them that hadn't played the characters previously. Whereas in Resident Evil Degeneration, again, the benefit of having an animated CGI film is they could use the actors they had that played the characters in the franchise. Leon is reprised as Mercier. Paul Mercier, who plays Leon in Resident Evil 4, and Claire was played by Alison Court, who had up to that point had been the only incarnation of Claire. Played Claire in every single rendition, whether they Code Veronica, Resident Evil 2, etc. That was nice as well. So not only do you get the familiar face, you get the iconic familiar voice as well. So yeah, I suppose we could start with the summary of the story. So this comes off of the heels of Resident Evil 4. It starts off with a summary of Resident Evil 2, the events of Raccoon City, and there's actually some really good imagery that I'm just going to flash up on the screen. Of you can see Raccoon City burning. They're doing like a news report. It's just absolutely fantastic. It's really setting the scene for Resident Evil Degeneration. Again, this was at a time where like CG had really advanced, and it almost feels like a massive game cutscene. Here's another absolute cracker of an image. Just showing the reporter talking about the incident in Raccoon City. So it's already setting the scene, makes us feel very familiar with the story. So yeah, we advance through that. Then we go to an airport in Washingtonville, which is a completely made up place as far as I know. Is it Washingtonville?
Washingtonville, because it takes place at the Harvardville airport. So
Harvardville, sorry, not Washingtonville, Harvardville. So you start off at an airport and you're introduced to a very familiar character, Claire Redfield, and she's got a brand new attire, which is not actually what I would associate Claire Redfield. And you normally associate Claire Redfield with a completely full red attire with jeans. She went to a completely different getup in this movie. She's rocking a pink turtleneck, like a white blazer overcoat. Here's a screenshot here, left hand side. So yeah, back to familiar.
But at the same time, like I don't think it feels too off from what you would expect from Claire.
Yeah.
You know, it's one of those things. It's a different look, but just the way everything fits together, it feels like a natural Claire Redfield outfit.
Yeah, and but that's what I mean. It feels like a very natural evolution in Claire Redfield's attire. So Claire Redfield now, at this point in time, so this would have been, assuming that Resident Evil 4 was set in 2005, 2006, so this would have been hot off the heels of that. Claire's now working for TerraSave, which we had a chat off air about this when TerraSave was first mentioned. TerraSave was super prominent in Resident Evil Revelations. They went into a lot of detail. The Terra Grigia incident was mentioned in Resident Evil Revelations, but as far as I know, this was the first mention and reference to TerraSave. But I understand, Jesse, that there were others around this time. We obviously need to check our time.
Yeah, now there is, like, I did some looking into it, and yes, Degeneration is the first time TerraSave was made, but there are other medias that exist outside of the video games or the CGI films that TerraSave plays a part of. Like you said, there's Terra Grigia, and there's Will Farmer and Harvardville. There's also Kajuju and stuff. There also was a small part of. which would have taken place, in 2009 around the events of Resident Evil 5. So, there's quite the extensive history with Terra Save after Degeneration.
No, agreed. Agreed. So Claire's working. That's kind of on the humanitarian side. Terra Save. Claire's working in that field. She's at the Harvardville airport, and at the same time, a senator. There's and this is a really cool part of the film is there's mad protesters about Will Farmer because the senator is involved with Will Farmer in some capacity as a special advisor on the board of Will Farmer, who is basically a faux umbrella of some sorts, but it's planning to bring the inoculation to the T virus rather than biological warfare, at least from the outset. But there's some really cool shots throughout the film of some activists in the background. There's like mad protests at the airport, and there's just what I think is iconic. I'll see if I can just bring it up now. And you've got again just totally fourth wall breaking. You've got some zombies, quote unquote zombies. It's just activists with masks on. And it's just when I saw that earlier, I rewatched it again earlier, and that did make me laugh because again they're talking about human testing in India and whatnot. It's been leaked into the media that's been happening, and it's kind of like no more experiments with humans, and they're all like they're all zombies. That kind of made me laugh for a hot moment. But yeah, it's at this time you're at Harvardville. Claire Redfield's there. The senator is also there. He's looking for a way of getting out without getting any mad media coverage because he's in hot water at the moment with Will Farmer. And what
Frederick Downing, I believe, was his name.
No,
that was the Will Farmer.
Ron
researcher.
Davis was the senator,
and
obviously, this is the first time Ron's ever mentioned, but it is interesting that like they expanded on his backstory a little bit because he was on the original committee that decided to bomb Raccoon City. So
yes,
even though he wasn't mentioned in the games, like he still played a very integral part of the ending of Resident Evil 2 and 3.
And again, that's what's quite nice about this. And I really feel what was missing from the live action films was either direct references to the source material, or just straight up almost being a sequel to the games. Whether we needed them to be a sequel to the games is a whole nother argument, but fantastic references to source material. And again, what I like about the Senator Ron Davis character is immediately established that he's a complete cock. Like he has no care in the world for humanity. There's parts throughout where he's running away, and he literally almost sacrificed like a young child in his escape to get out of the airport. And it's like, man, this guy is such a dickhead. But the character that they needed him to play. So yeah, Ron Davis is trying to find find a way out of the airport, and he's walking through the airport, and at that time, an associate of Will Farmer is taking a flight above the airport, and he isn't feeling too good at all. Really cool scene in the film. There's a few potholes that we'll pick up on through, but I'd like to know how on earth he actually did get on the plane. I'm not sure if you boys picked it up, how this injured fella managed to get onto the plane.
No, and that's
infected.
One of my gripes going back into it is the setup, like on its face, seems really cool, but at the same time, it's like, how did this happen, kind of thing? Because not only you have Frederick Downing, Ron Davis. You've got Claire and the Terra Save people. You also, all at the same airport at the same time. Then you also have Curtis Miller, who's introduced as a semi-antagonist / kind of, I guess neutral evil in the film. all in the airport at the same time that just so happens to have a flight coming in with a person who's been infected by the T virus. So like the setup like there is kind of weird because it's almost too perfect. Like everybody and everything happens to be in one place at one time as a huge coincidence. I think it's kind of explained later. I think Will Farmer was wanting to use this as knew about a plot, so they needed an excuse, and it seems like this is just an elaborate setup by Will Farmer to make it look like this was a terrorist attack and all that. But at the same time, like even though that's the explanation the film gives, like it still seems super convenient.
Yeah, and there's a big one just coming up now, which I think it's not completely film breaking, but to me it's so implausible. I just don't understand how nothing was spotted before it happened, and I'll just go into detail right now. So Ron's walking through the airport. He's donned the disguise of all disguises, which is just the cap. the cap. I'll just bring it up on screen now. You will not pick this man out of a lineup if he's wearing a hat and identify that man as Ron Davis. And he actually does get spotted by an activist. Again, fantastic fourth wall breaking stuff with the zombie mask. Because obviously they're there to taunt him. At that point, Claire then takes the mask off the activist. Obviously, she's got mad PTSD from Raccoon City. She's just like, stop being a moron. This is kind of too much. And this was the big one for me. The activist actually does end up getting arrested, and it kind of does this little twist. So the activist gets arrested. Then you kind of get this twist where another fella's walking up, and the security for Ron Davis also thinks it's an activist. And they actually try and pull the quote unquote mask off his face, and not quite coming off because this man is an actual zombie. I loved how it built up to that, and then a minute later I thought, obviously chaos ensued after this. A minute later I thought, how has this zombie got all the way through the airport, not bitten anybody else, and just happens to walk in front of Ron? Just absolutely that kind of stung a little bit. I thought, come on, boys, I'm sure we could have thought of a better way of getting a zombie into that. Into
well,
that equation.
Especially when you have the impending aircraft coming in with a zombie on it as well. It's again like it goes back to one of those things. Like it makes for a good scene, but at the same time, like when you actually stop to think about what's going on here, the scene kind of falls apart in execution because it's like, wait, so zombie got all the way through, didn't hurt anybody. There's also a zombie on the airplane coming in, about to come in. It's like, how did these two events happen at the same time? Like, because you almost feel like at one part, like, again, like the whole subplot of this is Will Farmer's wanting an excuse to, mass produce the T virus for whatever reasons. They're also doing some other nefarious stuff under the table. And you get the idea that they're wanting to kind of clean up loose ends and stuff, but at the same time, it almost seems like they did their A plan and B plan at the same time, or nobody talked to somebody about what was actually going on, and they're like, you got somebody probably like in the little shadow, corner office of Will Farmer, talking to his other nefarious buddy, going like, "Oh man, I released a zombie in the airport," and he's like, "Oh shit, I just released the plane zombie," like trying to figure out what, trying to figure out what plot, yeah.
All jokes aside, the airport explosion scene was fucking fantastic, where it just kind of comes through the terminal, just mowing zombies down, and has a absolutely mental explosion. Absolutely fantastic. So definitely A+ for the explosion, but the events leading up to that are a very, very borderline lazy writing. So Claire knows Claire knows what the crack is. She's been through this thousand times. It's at this point that she starts telling people, I know what this is. These are zombies. Fucking aim for the head, because it's the classic cliche of modern zombies film. Is that people shoot them in the chest and they get back up. Oh, they're getting back up. They must be invincible. And it's like, well, if you just shot them in the face the first time, you wouldn't have had that problem. Claire evidently knows what's going on, but what she does do is she spots a nefarious character leaving the airport, and this man sticks out like an absolute needle. You'll just see it in this thing. Just absolutely sticks out. He looks like he doesn't want to be. He's not waiting for anyone. He just walks off nefariously. What I didn't feel like they explained enough was how actually he managed to concoct this setup. I don't know if you guys picked anything up.
Yeah, and again, like, that's the whole thing here. It's like, you get the feeling that he's involved somehow at this point of the film. It's not really clear who he's working for, what his motives are. But I think later on in the film, this is where the fact that you have two conflicting zombie attacks going on at the same time at this airport kind of, start to conflict a little bit. Like, you get the like throughout the film, like there's this whole thing of like Will Farmer's orchestrating this whole thing. So it's like, so did they know that Curtis Miller's setup was here? Like, did they know what he was about to do? So they were going to take advantage of the situation, or was this just a lucky break? Or, is it Curtis had his plot going on, Will Farmer had their own plot going on, and it just so happens to line up perfectly on the same day? I think the film doesn't go into a lot of detail on that. I don't know if that's intentional or if it's just nobody thought that people would think that much into it, because at this point we're probably diving too deep into the narrative. But yeah, it's not really greatly explained. Like, his motives are explained, but how he was able to kind of pull this off, like, I think maybe it's hinted at some point in the film that Will Farmer might have helped him out a little bit to kind of cause this, but it doesn't really seem to make sense either, because you've got the airplane guy as well. So I don't know, the narrative to me gets really muddled here on what the actual how it actually happened came to pass.
But what happens. We are where we are now. The airport is placed under a quarantine. No one's allowed to leave. Everyone knows what's up. This isn't everyone's first rodeo in bioterrorism. So they obviously deploy all the humanitarian aid. Soldiers are deployed, and everything is sealed off. Then we're introduced to two brand new characters, and I must admit they're so forgettable. I've actually forgotten their names, so I don't know if you two have pulled their names up.
Angela and Greg.
Angela and Greg, who are part of the SRT, a special response team. I'll take it that stands for. Who are going to be deployed to go into the airport. It's revealed later that Angela's got a few more connections than meets the eye, but again, very, very, very. I suppose you can't really get around it if there's not really a story to build, but very convenient that the plot lines that then follow. But the catch is, the White House the Pentagon has called up and they said you can't go in there unless you take one special chap with you, and that chap, of course, is the man himself, Leon S. Kennedy, this is the debut of his Resident Evil 6 style of get up. He's gone away from the costume that he wore in Resident Evil 4, and he ended up using this for Resident Evil 6 as well. Looks exactly the same. Wouldn't be surprised if they use the same model too. But yeah, Leon S. Kennedy's on the scene. This will be his first mission since Resident Evil 4, seems anyway. Although what I'm very interested in is how they're going to tell this story or how they're going to tell Infinite Darkness' story. Because isn't that set after Resident Evil 4? So how on earth is that going to tie into canon of Resident Evil Degeneration, unless they're just going to intentionally ignore these films?
And that doesn't seem to be the case. I think these kind of all happen congruently, because I think if I looked, and I'm blanking on timelines right now, but I think it goes Resident Evil 4, then Infinite Darkness, then Degeneration. It's either I can't remember if Infinite Darkness takes place before or after Degeneration, but they literally have like all of these events happen over the span of like 3 or 4 years back to back. So Leon doesn't. In any case, Leon doesn't get much of a break after he returns from Spain.
He doesn't, and I can imagine, especially now we've got Infinite Darkness, or it's going to be upcoming shortly. You know, it's going to get to a point where Claire and Leon are just going to be like, we really need to stop meeting. Like, we just need to. Every time I see you, there's zombies, and every time I see you, there's a bioterrorist incident. We just never see each other. It'd just be no problems. So what ends up happening is Leon, Angela, and Greg then formulate a plan to get into the facility to rescue the senator, because that's the whole crux of this. Claire actually off screen made I can't remember if it was off screen or on screen, but there was a clip that's played to Leon. Doesn't immediately identify her voice, which, you know, I wouldn't necessarily, if I was doing something else, I wouldn't be able to identify your two voices. But it doesn't immediately identify it's Claire, but they're in there specifically to pick up the senator to get him out of the airport as an extraction. What do you guys think of these two characters, this Greg and Angela? Completely forgettable in your opinion? Or might be a bit too harsh?
I don't know if I would necessarily say completely forgettable. I think out of the two of them, Greg is the more forgettable character, just because Greg is that standard, like, gung-ho army throwaway background character, you know, that runs in guns blazing. Like, his last scene of the film makes him a little bit more memorable because of what he does, but for the most part, every time he's on screen, he could just be like more roided out Chris Redfield. You know, like he just, you know, it's just a big dumb guy with a machine gun. Like that. That's kind of the character he portrays the whole film, which again isn't necessarily a bad thing. And I do kind of like the scenes that he's on, because you know they kind of make for fun little action bits, but there's nothing really special about him. Nothing really memorable about him. Angela, on the other hand, I feel was a lot more of a memorable character. She was given a lot more backstory, and she obviously continues through the rest of the film until the very last scene. And to me, like, Angela would have been the perfect setup for Resident Evil 6. Like, Resident Evil 6 introduces Helena Harper, when I think they could have honestly just kept Angela from Degeneration as Leon's kind of eventual sidekick. Because like their characters share a lot of the same qualities, both physically and backstory wise. Like one's got a fucked up brother, one's got a fucked up sister. You know, so you know both get infected with like BOW stuff. So I think out of the two, Angela's the stronger, more memorable character, more fleshed out. So.
What about yourself, Matt?
Yeah, I'd have to agree. I mean, I didn't dislike Greg as a character, but it's becoming more and more easy to spot the throwaway characters when we get them. I mean, even in the trailer for Infinite Darkness, it looks like we've already got our ex-military gung-ho guy that's going to be joining Leon. I mean, he's part of the main four. Angela, I did enjoy. I liked her character. She reminded me of more of a calm, laid-back character, like from Dark Side Chronicles, with Leon's past part. What was her name? With the Code Veronica virus, the girl in the white dress.
Oh,
you know who I'm talking about?
Yeah, it's in Operation Javier, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like she was a good.
Yeah, I can't. Yeah.
She was a good character. She definitely didn't feel throwaway to me. And Jesse makes a good point because honestly, it's almost like you took a reskin of her and threw her in for 6 when they could have just literally rewritten a little bit of her backstory to fit in perfectly with 6. She's a character you could see going into other movies and you would enjoy having her back in them. Greg, on the other hand, wasn't bad. I mean, he was more heroic, more gung ho, like you would know, but obviously we're here for the main characters. I mean, which would be the next person that we're going to mention here, the actual antagonists of the movie. But yeah, I'd like to have seen more of Angela.
You were talking about Manuela.
Yeah.
Manuela's from Operation. But it's immediately apparent that Leon and, you know, two alphas as ever, they'll probably won't get on. Leon had to throughout the very short time that they have together. Leon had, you know, hit some home truths. I mean, Greg just goes into a room. It's a really cool scene where he's just mowing. He's just absolutely Scarface, mowing all of these zombies down, and they all get back up. And he's like, "What? I don't miss. You know, how on earth are they getting back up?" And Leon, just like what Claire did, got to shoot him in the head. These once these guys are infected, there's no way of putting them down unless you shoot them straight in the head. So,
see,
go on.
I like that. I like that because they gave the image of taking the standard military soldier who's used to combat, used to fighting, used to hitting his marks, and throwing him into this environment with a new enemy where it's just not working. It's his day one, and that's why they have that whole connection with Leon, where Leon doesn't want to seem to be his superior, but he is the expertise here. Like, he's the one that has been through this. He knows what's happening, and that's the good connection between him and Greg. Greg wants to come off as the alpha. He wants to be on top. He wants to be the one saving lives and doing everything. And Leon's like, look, you have to play it by my rules and, you know, let me teach you what's happening or else it's going to end in disaster. And that is what happens.
Well, yeah, because I mean, this starts from the scene that Leon is introduced into the film to Greg and Angela, where, you know, Greg's like, he doesn't even look military, and it's like, well, you know, he's from, you know, literally the president sent him here, so, you know, guess it doesn't matter if he looks military or not. Like, people above us say that he's the guy that knows what's up, so, you know, which is still, you know, the whole clash. Like, you can tell, like, even though Greg's a hothead, you know, kind of, you know, military guy, you can tell like he still has that, you know, level, like he's looking for somebody to like respect and lead, but it's got to be that military style, you know, like that military look, which is kind of I think kind of typical, at least in my military experience, is, you know, you look at you know, somebody comes in that doesn't like look like what you think a leader should look like, and you're like, wait, why is he leading? So, you know, I understand kind of Greg's perspective of it, of like, you know, here I am, you know, Greg probably, you know, buzzed haircut, you know, stocky military guy, you know, does, you know, toes the line like military style. And then Leon comes in with his wavy, flowy hair, and he's like, wait, why the hell would I listen to this guy? Like, can't even get a haircut, you know?
Yeah, it gives him all the pretty boy syndrome. So obviously he downgrades what he actually thinks is.
Oh no, agreed.
Okay.
Oh yeah, right. No, agreed. And I think there almost becomes a mutual respect there. It's like, well, obviously he knows what he's doing, so you know.
Yeah.
It was a reason he sent here. I'm actually just gonna take my foot off the gas a little bit, just let him do what he's meant to do. So we have this transition. They're going through all the offices of the airport, mowing all the zombies down, making their way to try and find the senator. And at that point, we switch over to the senator's perspective, who's with Claire and the small child that Claire's been unfortunately passed with. Very much a reference to Sherry Birkin, if I've ever seen one. Exploring the motherly side of Claire that was seen before. But however, Claire doesn't want to rest on her laurels. She don't want to, and the same as Ron to an extent. They don't want to sit there and just wait to be found. They want to get out there, get themselves into open space, and kind of venture forward through the night. They eventually do cross paths, though. And that's where you get the iconic line from Resident Evil 2, where Claire ducks down, get down. A different voice actor, of course, but we definitely appreciate that reference. And yeah,
Still by a Paul though.
Yeah, still by.
Still by a Paul.
Yeah,
and I love the imagery here, and I love how aware the film is by the choice it makes. When Claire walks out of the the little area that they're in to go try to find a way out, where she has the umbrella for protection, and it's the red and white, literal like Umbrella Corporation logo umbrella.
Oh yeah,
and
there you go.
She's aware of it, and she's like, oh, this is ironic.
Yeah, she loves it. Absolutely loves it. But again, can I have a
Which
weapon?
Which is unfortunate, because I would have loved. Yeah, but I would have loved to see Claire just absolutely beat the fuck out of some zombies with that umbrella, though.
Yeah, just stabbing them violently. But yeah,
I would have loved to see some like Dead Rising style like zombie fighting.
But so we have this scene that you finally get the meetup of all meetups. What are you doing here? What are you doing here? It was quite nice to see them back again, tied up in another bioterrorist incident. Again, it's established that Ron's a dickhead. No one likes Ron, but now they have to get out of this. Area. This is now where we get the death of Greg. Again, as soon as he gets bitten, as ever with zombie films, the writing's on the wall, and he done the right thing, and he perished while saving the others.
I mean, to me though, like Greg's sacrifice, and this is the case in any kind of zombie media where turns out there's a cure available. Like his sacrifice is almost in vain. They were like literally right by the door. I feel like they could have just kept going. And to know that the cure was literally outside, like obviously, the cure gets taken out very quickly, but I don't know, like it's just it was a weird choice knowing that after he died, knowing that like there was literally a cure right outside. So it's almost like one of those like, could you just not have kept running? Like he was bit, they could have just jabbed him with the T-virus vaccine, and Greg could have lived to fight another day.
Yeah, that's a breakdown of communication in that movie too. I mean, because the thing is, literally minutes later, TerraSafe shows up with vaccines for the normal army to go in and exterminate the infected. There was no communication. No one had a cell phone. No one was aware of anything that was happening. It did feel like a throwaway death at that point.
Yeah. Like it was like a big heroic thing, and I think the film does Greg a disservice by immediately making it unnecessary. Like literally 30 seconds later, vaccinated like army soldiers run in and just start gunning everybody down, and it's like, oh, okay. Like Greg could have just hold on for less than a minute and he could have been fine.
Yeah, definitely. But what we do have though is zombie Greg. We do have a zombie Greg, and that's something I do want to address. Actually, is and again, this could just be very specific to this plot. They've only got so much time to work with. People turn into zombies very quick in this film, almost as quick as Dawn of 28 Days Later, where they literally the second a speck of infected blood touches you, like the second later you turn. But we saw this with the police officer at the start of the film, who's bitten the first victim of this disaster within a couple of minutes. We are literally talking 1 or 2 minutes. He turns into a zombie, and this happens with Greg too. So do you guys just think that's just them trying to squash everything in, or do you think this is maybe a slightly mutated version of the T-virus that reacts a little bit quicker?
I think honestly, it's a combination of both. Like I think for the film's sake, you have to make it a little bit quicker, but we would be going into, it's not. I'm trying to think of like when, obviously, like the Raccoon City outbreak happened 6 years prior to this, 7 years prior to, somewhere more than 5 years ago. Plus all the research that brought the T virus up to the point that it would have been at Raccoon City. So you have pre-Raccoon City research going into the T virus, post Raccoon City going into it. It's not a stretch of the imagination to say that the T virus hasn't progressed and maybe is a more effective and more quicker at turning. So I think that's kind of where it falls. It's a little bit of speed for the movie, but maybe speed from research over the years since the initial outbreak.
Yeah, no, I don't think that's too far. What was you going to say, Matt? Sorry.
No, I was just going to say it's definitely not hard to believe. Sure, the movie sped it up a little bit for the process of the movie, but I mean, even like the fact that if we skipped, a couple years ahead of time and we're in Resident Evil 6, the C virus was basically just the Tyrant virus, just a lot quicker and with just a few more modifications. I mean, it wouldn't be hard after a couple of years if something like that was genetically mutated before with a main strain for there to be upgraded to it to be more of a viral pathogen. So, I mean, both ways that you look at it, whatever avenue you want to take, it makes sense. But they do turn really quick in this. Because if I remember correctly, depending on how bad the wounds were in the original Resident Evil, it could take 2 hours to 72 hours, depending on how long the person lived. So,
well, if you remember from the original Resident Evil 2, you had Brian Irons, it's the mayor's daughter. I was supposed to look after her, but I failed. And she's just kind of laying there. She's obviously infected. She never turned, and he was, more than happy to have his monologue and without fear of waking up at any point. So yeah, I think.
Or just look at Marvin. Like Marvin went through quite the lengthy process in the originals. Because you got to think, I mean, he was infected at some point during the police station, and was kind of alive throughout, the majority, I would say, of 2 and 3. Before he ultimately turns.
What's
like
interesting?
Over 2 or 3 days, I think.
And that's the thing too, because he goes through. I think the English translation is where the confusion gets, because he's not dead when you walk through in Resident Evil 3. I think the actual translations would be more. Yeah, he's unconscious. But yeah, so Marvin. Timeline there is, I would say more than 36 hours before he turned at a minimum.
Actually, it's a slight digression though, with obviously talking about Marvin. What I did find with Marvin is he's the only person that's turned into a zombie that I've ever seen, that's especially in the original, where he turned when he was alive. Like in all the zombies in this, they died first, even for 30 seconds. Then they're reanimated and come alive. But if you remember in Resident Evil 2, you walk through the door and he stands up and he goes, "Oh," which is still his human form. And then you see his colour change, and now he's a zombie.
Yeah, that one's hard to depict.
Yeah,
I mean, I guess it was probably for the game's point, just to make us feel for Martin, to make him his own kind of character. Like, I think the change of color was just supposed to signify he was a harder enemy to kill. Because the fact is, he probably did die. By the time Leon or Claire gets in there, they see him rising from the dead. And the fact is, we've never seen a zombie or infected person change color like that rapidly. So I think it was just for him personally. But I couldn't tell you.
And thinking about that, though, in Resident Evil 3, the original, like if you actually do the part where Murphy comes back to life, doesn't Murphy do a similar transition? But I mean, obviously Murphy's already dead at that point, but I think Murphy's zombie character does something similar to Marvin's. I might be wrong on that, but the way memory serves is he also has a very awkward zombie transition.
I remember.
Well, bringing it back round to Degeneration, they do finally manage to escape the complex. They manage to find the senator, Again, he's such a selfish bastard. He just runs out there by himself and goes, yeah, I'm okay. Save me, please. And absolutely no credit given to anyone that's got him to that point, as you would expect. So that was pretty much the airport, the first kind of act, I would say. Everything's established. You know what you know the basis of the film now and all the. And this for me is where things start to change a little bit, and it starts getting Angela a lot more involved in the story. Claire makes a completely throwaway comment, in which she says, "Oh yeah, I just happened to walk past this chap, kind of acting a little bit nefarious." As you walk through, everybody knows who this guy is. I guess he's a activist, terrorist type person.
Well, so Curtis, to give Curtis the backstory, Curtis was a researcher at Will Pharma, and when he found out that they were using the T virus, he was very, very much against it, and that goes back, and still kind of goes back to my confusion, because Will Pharma was wanting to use him as a scapegoat in this whole airport incident, paint him as a terrorist and stuff. But at the same time, it's he was doing his own thing trying to do this, but it looks like Will Pharma itself had a plan or two that they were trying to pin on him, and it just so happened that he was doing it at the same. So again, even once we get the context here of Curtis Miller being a disgruntled Will Pharma employee with a chip on his shoulder, and knowing that, Will Pharma kicked him to the curb, and they're, trying to silence him as well, because he's, getting ready to blow the lid on Will Pharma, T virus research. Again, even having all those plot elements together, it still doesn't, the whole outbreak at the airport still just kind of ends up clashing, because it's okay, so are they getting played by the guy that they're trying to play? Kind of scenario where it's you got too much conflicting BOW attacks at once, and it's hard to, still it gets muddled in what the actual, who's playing who, who started this actually, because it seems like he did it and it seems like they did it. So still once it even Curtis's character is established, it still kind of doesn't all piece together to my liking.
Yeah, and I think that's a running theme. And we can't I appreciate this was the first big effort from Capcom to make their own feature-length Resident Evil film, but there were quite big flaws in this film, which it's almost like own goals in some areas. What then happens is Angela fills us in that Curtis is actually my brother, which I didn't actually expect. I didn't actually expect that revelation, but she says, "Yep, Curtis is my brother, and he's pretty much responsible for the entire accident." But what the monologue that we get filled in with is that his family were involved at Raccoon City, and again, I love the flashbacks to Raccoon City because game. Just seeing if I can just see he's trying to, let me back into Raccoon City. He somehow manages to be again it's like the guy walking through the zombie walking through the airport. This guy is on the outskirts of the town, and he's like, "Let me back in, let me back in." It's like, dude, the missile's already landed, or it's on the cusp of landing. There's no way you're gonna walk 10 miles just to get inside Raccoon City back to whatever apartment you're in. You're complaining literally the outskirts.
Yeah, because that's the interesting thing too. You see this shot of Curtis outside of one of the military quarantine zones. Knowing that Raccoon City's just been destroyed, and going oh god, my family's still there. Which it kind of begs the question of why was Curtis not in the city? And I think like it's never explained obviously in the lore, but I get the impression that Harvardville is only like maybe a couple of miles away from Raccoon City. Because like if he was still working for Will Farm, I think it's kind of implied that he was working for Will Pharma during the Raccoon City incident. Um, so he's over in Harvardville at work, and then comes home and he's like on his way home, and it's like, oh crap, the city's gone. But at the same time, like it doesn't really make a whole lot of sense because we do know like the Raccoon City incident took place over almost the course of an entire week. So was he just out of town on business? Like, well, why wasn't he in Raccoon City?
Mhm.
And then to come back and to know like actually how far away he would have been, because most of the military quarantine zones, and this is shown in Outbreak, were completely overran after I think day 3, either day 3 or day 4, like when Leon and Claire enter Raccoon City. So like he's nowhere near the town, and like just shows up at the tail end of it, which to me still kind of raises a lot of questions. But we'll just put it up to just
Yeah,
plot not being strong in that department.
yeah. Some of the stuff we do have to fill in. On a positive note, though, we get some cracking Resident Evil 2 flashbacks with Leon in his original get up and Claire in her original. Absolutely fantastic. I loved seeing that. Very, very small flashbacks for Raccoon City. Basically, what Leon was saying is, fucking, you got to take Claire's point of view here. She's been through a lot worse than this. Sorry, they mentioned that back in the airport. Claire's been through a lot than this, and Leon, for the benefit of people that haven't, I guess, it's played Resident Evil or familiar with it, and this is the first time you're going through, you're exploring Resident Evil media. This Resident Evil media, he explained the Raccoon City incident, but again, that's a nice little fan service, just to see. And we then get the encounter with the researcher who Claire saw in the airport earlier. Is it Fredericks?
Yep, Frederick Downing.
Yeah, Frederick Downing. He's English, which automatically makes him nefarious. English man.
Naturally.
Yeah, complete. He's mild mannered, but complete antagonist. You can just tell. Yeah, everything he says in this is almost too obvious in some regards, and this is where it kind of starts slipping up. But just before I explore that, they ship in a bunch of vaccines to the airport because it's been completely under quarantine. They've got all the humanitarian aid in. They've shipped loads of Will Pharma vaccines in, and they're starting they've done the trial now. This is the first kind of in the field vaccination tests on people, not tests, vaccination program. What are they? How is this vaccine being deployed? Is it people that are already infected, or is it people that haven't been infected and that it's not an antidote? Is what I'm saying. It's before that wasn't really explained.
I think the idea is to get all for sure non-infected people inoculated first, and then move on, with whatever's left to maybe potentially. But we're not even really shown that anybody made it out of the airport infected in the first place. So I think it's more of because the T virus is both it's both transmitted through fluid, but it's also an aerosol as well. So, which the aerosol portion of it takes longer to infect. So, we're not given much reason to believe anybody made it out there with a bite. But the fact that you did have a T virus outbreak could imply that it could be in the water, could be in the air. So, you would still want to vaccinate against it just in case somebody did breathe it in or drink it in and just not be showing immediate signs of infection.
That's one part that confuses me about the movie, and I understand it's not completely grounded, but within the time that the actual outbreak happens in the airport to the amount of time that people panic, and get attacked, get bitten, run for their lives through the doors, to the bathrooms, anywhere, this infection would have been way, way past the airport. But the movie plays it off like they never managed to escape, like the infected never got outside of the airport. But the
Yeah.
quarantine zone is just the airport itself. So,
Yeah, that is an issue because I mean, think about if you were in the parking lot, like you hear people screaming and stuff as you're walking up to the door. You're gonna be like, yeah, I'm gonna maybe today's not the day to catch my flight.
Dip.
yeah.
Because I mean, really, the only way a lot of the outside world would have probably known about it would have been at the moment the plane crashed. I
Yeah.
know it was. Well, I say that. I think maybe the only saving grace is you did have a live news broadcast going on. So maybe because of the live news broadcast, like some, military or local police department was watching the news broadcasts, sees people, ripping people's throats out at the airport, and they're like, oh shit, we gotta get there like now.
Yeah.
Which still is an impressive response time, but
That's
kind of
almost too impressive.
it's almost too impressive, but that's really about the only thing that you can kind of say here.
Yeah.
So
Which is
what
weird
then?
because with most pandemics in any type of movie that has a pathogen like that, you feel like they'd have some type of detection method at this point, especially at an airport,
Yeah, that's true.
That's it. Yeah,
But
I didn't
it's still,
think about that.
at this time though, like the United States, like we're not sure how embraced the world is on, um, the existence of bioweapons. Like we're led to believe that the world is at least semi-consciously aware that they exist. But you also have to think of the fact that like Raccoon City was covered up by the government. Like anything that's happened on American soil to this point, the U.S. government has swept under the rug. So even if it's believed to happen elsewhere in the world, you probably wouldn't install any kind of detection stuff in American airports because the government's trying to play it off as it's not a thing that actually exists. Anytime like you try to do something like even under the rug like that, it still eventually comes out what the real purpose is. So I think the United States government thinks that Raccoon City was a one-off. They covered it up and it'll just never happen again.
The less they talk about it, the better.
Yep.
Indeed.
Yep.
What then proceeds to happen is conveniently the vaccines that are shipped in to deal this incident just happen to catch fire and explode. And now we have no vaccines. Again, another little bit of a slipping point for the film. We have no vaccines at all. That's it. The whole vaccine supply just happened to have been on them trucks. Why somebody would do that and not have a master vaccine or something? Again, I'm not a fucking virologist or anything, but I don't know why they wouldn't have that, to the side. So in the event something catastrophic happens, because we know that people want this, it's on the black market, and bioterrorism is an actual thing in this universe. I don't know why they wouldn't have made it a separate one.
Well, I don't think the issue here is that it's literally all of the vaccine. I think it's just all of the local vaccine. Like, because we do know, like, the Will Pharma headquarters, who has, Will Pharma's been strategic in developing a T-virus vaccine, like, conveniently right down the road from this airport. Like, I think it was, when they say, like, that was all of it, I think that was just all that this Will Pharma location had, not necessarily that this is all the T-virus vaccine in the world, or even probably even the country. Like, I'm sure Will Pharma, we know, the Umbrella Corporation had headquarters all around the world. Like, I would assume Will Pharma probably has this, because they actually, to go to that point, they were testing T-virus vaccines in India. So at least in the United States and India both have access to the T-virus vaccine.
Yeah, if I remember correctly, there's a line right after that happened saying that was all that they had that was manufactured so far at this point. It wasn't the entire, stocking, like the entire stock that they had.
Okay.
It was everything that was mobile and available for that incident, which means there would be a delay in time for the next batch to come out to be shipped, to be delivered, to be inoxated. So
this is where the film splits off. So there's two branching paths. We've established that we've established the main antagonist for the film. So Angela obviously identifies that as her brother. Her and Leon make that splitting quest, which I think kind of leans into your theory, Jesse, that she should have been in Rivalry 6 because she has that natural connection to Leon specifically. They go off on the side to discover the whereabouts of her brother. There's also a minor change in scene. Just shows Richard torching his apartment of all his plans and whatnot, and leaving his apartment, which is where, of course, Leon and Angela are going. And at the same time, slightly bizarre, and I know they needed to get Claire to the Will Farmer headquarters, but Claire agrees, not even reluctantly, Claire agrees to have a spot of tea, I think was the term that they used in the film, a spot of tea with Mr. Fredericks. She was very insistent, there was the big explosion. How can I help you, Mr. Fredericks? Is there something I can do, anywhere to help out? Obviously, she's a humanitarian at the end of the day. And he said, yeah, come and meet me back at the Will Farmer headquarters for a spot of tea. I don't know, it's big red flags to me. And completely out of character for Claire, because we always know Claire as a very well-rounded, intelligent, thinks on her feet person, would do anything for anyone, always chooses sensibly and level-headed, and that was just none of those decisions.
Yeah, and then so you've got the plot line of Leon and I've even said her name earlier now. Angela, sorry, I completely. I was thinking every A name in the world besides that one. You've got Leon and Angela. They're at Curtis's house watching it burn. She's kind of giving a little bit more backstory there. Then you've got Claire with Frederick, heading to the Will Pharma facility. So then you kind of get this point at the film where everything reconverges. Like the actual split between Leon and Claire splitting up and getting back together is very short-lived in this film. Like you go, they're together, then they're not, and then they're back together again very quickly at the Will Pharma headquarters, which to me, I really enjoy a lot of the scenes at Will Pharma, but there's a couple of points in it where I feel like the film gets the weakest. And it's mostly with Claire and Frederick's interactions shortly after, they arrive at Will Farm, and we transition from Leon and Angela back to Claire and Frederick, where they're sitting in the office. He's making tea or whatever, and they're using the computer, and he's like, "Oh, here's all the vaccine data," and she's basically like, "Oh, what's that?" And he's like, "Well, probably shouldn't show you this, but it's the G virus." And she's like, "Wait, what do you mean it's the G virus?" And he's like, "Oh yeah, we kind of snuck a little bit about Raccoon City." And then like he shows her this, and then like she's like, "Well, I've obviously got to report this because nobody's supposed to have the G virus." And then he's like, surprised Pikachu face. He's like, "Wait, but I'll get in trouble." And it's like, "Well,
I got
why'd you show me?"
Yeah. I that's what I don't understand. Like, to me, like that's such a weak point for the film, because it doesn't necessarily fit into any narrative. Because like obviously, you get the impression at this point that Will Pharma is doing some shady shit, but it doesn't seem like, even though Claire works for TerraSave and TerraSave's been a thorn in Will Pharma's side, you don't get the impression that like Frederick has any nefarious intentions with Claire. Like, it seems like he's trying to just be friendly and, kind of throw her off the trail. But then he drops this big landmine out, where he's like, "Oh yeah, like, no, Claire, I'm one of the good guys." And he's like, "Oh yeah, by the way, G virus." And it's like, "I'm not actually a good guy." And it's like, but why put on all this facade and then get surprised when she's not buying it anymore? Because that comes along also, the whole thing behind that setup too is, Ron Davis calls, because Ron, is involved in, some of Will Pharma's business dealings and stuff, and him and Frederick have a, established relationship, which is shown in a couple of scenes outside the airport. So he, like Ron's like, don't show her anything, and then Frederick proceeds to show her everything, and it's like, I don't get it. Like, you're terrible at trying to cover this up.
But by everything as well, we literally mean everything. This motherfucker's firstly, and this is just things I've picked up just from watching it today. First thing he does is he comes up to the kind of the barrier at the start of the at the front of the facility. His fucking card's not working, so he goes, I'll just pop in the master code. Well, Claire can easily just look over his shoulder, and now she knows the master code, the entire Will Farmer facility. So they then go in, and he goes, oh yeah, this room's pressurized. This is how the security system works. It's like, dude, you're literally giving this woman, like, you have a lot of trust in this woman.
He's like the worst bad guy in history, because again, you're never given the impression that he has any nefarious intentions towards Claire. Like, yes, he is a bad guy, but I get the impression he's like trying to save his own skin the whole time. Like, I think he's trying to hide things from Claire, so she thinks that he's just, like, oh, I'm just the good guy that works at Will Pharma, but yet proceeds to do all of the wrong things to break that impression, but doesn't really seem to have a master plan in mind for dealing with Claire. It's just, I don't know. Like, I just think he's a terrible bad guy. Like, Ron Davis makes a better villain here than the kind of actual villain here.
But this is all just a way of getting Claire into the Will Farmer facility. So then she's in the it concludes the main part, the boss battle of the film, if you like. So it's almost holding the viewer's hand and pulling them along rather than having coming to a natural conclusion. But yeah, again, just odd stuff. As you said, with the surprise Pikachu. And then he tells her everything. And she obviously goes, oh yeah, well, obviously I need to tell someone about this. And he goes, oh, I just need to pop to the server room. What?
Yeah. Yeah, it's like, what?
But also, again, this shows Claire's lack of level-headedness in this film. Like, why would she not identify, oh, this guy's fucking obviously not going to the server room. There's nothing wrong with the server, because I am literally on the fucking computer while you're saying this, and there's nothing wrong. Nothing's gone wrong this side. No reason for you to go there. Again, just.
And I then, really wish you can kind of forgive it, like, because she does take it as weird because she immediately calls Leon, but I think the only thing that like prevents it from just feeling completely out of place is when she's looking down and she sees Curtis leaving the same area, like, because Claire automatically knows where the server room is. And she sees, like Curtis walking through a door, and then Frederick calls and he's like, oh God, Curtis put a bomb down here. Oh my God, like we're going to blow up. And Claire just instantly knows that, like, because she saw Curtis walking, that he was in the server room. Like, not that Frederick made it up or anything and planted the bomb himself. But again, like, a lot of the motives here, like, you kind of get them, but at the same time you don't. Because I don't know if Curtis planted the bomb or Frederick planted the bomb. Because it sounds like Curtis wants to expose Will Pharma. And I don't think blowing up the servers that store the information that would be incriminating would be the way to go about whistleblowing Will Pharma. I mean, I might be wrong, but it doesn't make sense. But that's how the movie kind of plays off. They don't really make it one way or the other. Like, they just, I guess they kind of leave it open-ended whether Frederick or Curtis did the bomb. But it doesn't really make sense for Curtis to do it. But at the same time, it doesn't really make sense for Frederick to do it either, because they need that research data.
I mean, it makes sense for Frederick to do it if he knew Curtis was going to attack, if he knew what was going to happen, then make him the scapegoat, so that when the media comes out, it looks like another terrorist attack, and he destroys all the evidence at the same time. So it would actually play to his strengths to have that happen.
Yeah, it does, but you're not really given the impression that, like, if that was the line of thinking, I think it's still just dumb luck because nobody knew that, Curtis was going to get the G virus or would stupidly infect himself with the G virus either. Which is, what immediately, like follows this is Curtis injecting himself with the G virus. So Frederick, like, even if he's the one that planted the bomb, like, he kind of dumb luck made his motives make sense.
Yeah.
Versus the actual plot set it up for him.
Now, fortunately, Leon and Angela get there before the police and the military get there, and Angela has a couple of words with her brother. I completely forgot to say this, but is it Richard? Curtis, sorry, it's Curtis, isn't it?
Curtis.
Yeah.
Curtis is played by Roger Craig Smith, who's obviously Chris Redfield in Resident Evil 5, which is really cool. Also, another bit of trivia here on top of that, this was packed with a trailer for Resident Evil 5. It's obviously 2008, so the DVD release had the trailer for Resident Evil 5 in it. Again, it's all linked. Capcom tend to once they use a voice actor, they'll use them for at least 10 years. But yeah, so they have a few choice words to exchange, and then this is where we're building towards the ultimate climax of the film. The military turn up to shut this shit down. You quickly establish that this isn't going to be a run of the mill, just take him out. Because he then goes to inject himself with the G virus, and he basically turns into William Birkin 2. And it's, oh man, the one thing this film does really right is just the attention to detail with the mutations, and some of the scene, like the action sequences and the views are just, honestly, you could take a screenshot of it and it looks so beautiful, and you just slowly start to see him just morph into the absolute madman that was William Birkin. But it's virtually the same.
Yeah, but it's so good to see it in this level of fidelity, which is, obviously something we didn't get to experience with Birkin until more recently. But just this whole transformation, the whole look of Curtis is a G monster. It's just absolutely like gorgeous scenery. It's beautifully sculpted model. It was just I remember getting to this part in the film and just like love, like this being one of my favorite parts as far as the action goes, because the rest of the zombies throughout it like are kind of generic and forgettable, which is the case of most zombies in Resident Evil or whatever, but with all the callbacks to Resident Evil 2 to end with a G creation, I think was just super fitting, and it was, like I said, just amazing to see a Birkin-esque monster in this level of graphical fidelity. Was absolutely incredible.
And I think it's only in this capacity, in this medium, that you're able to have something like this. You couldn't have this on a live action film to this extent. I mean, it felt so natural to have him morph into the G. Oh, absolutely. Yep. Obviously, they just start wailing on him, and
we get to see the standard squads fighting the G virus, and then you think they're putting up a good effort, then you realize it's like, oh no, wait, he's just kind of transforming a little bit more. Now you're screwed. You get a little bit of the Chris too, because there's parts where Leon wants to try to save people and he can't. They die anyway, so he gets a taste of what it's like to be like Chris.
Yeah.
And then we get Leon with a machine gun for the first time. First time we get to see him actually having a machine gun. And not a pistol.
Yeah. Yeah, I didn't think about that. But yeah, agreed. And this is where you get the boss battle film, and it looks absolutely gorgeous. There's Leon with an M203 underslung grenade launcher. Just every scene in this, I'm just looking at screen grabs from online. These aren't like press release screenshots. This is literally just cuts from the film, and it literally everything just looks beautiful. They all look like wallpapers. Absolutely fantastic. So it's a very well made film. It's a very well made film, and naturally there's a boss battle, and it goes all over the facility. Very, very. This facility kind of reminds me of the lab from Resident Evil 2, the original, where it's all kind of, it's got like catwalks coming off it, and it's all on like a spinning like thing in the middle. I don't quite know. It looks like it's all in one big like shaft, like in the original Resident Evil 2. And naturally there's explosions and all sorts. And of course it all culminates in isn't there a second form of, or not a second, but almost a mutation of original of the G character, even if it's just subtle. It has its own journey.
I think but it stays very close. Like, we don't see him go into, obviously like a G5, or not even really necessarily like G4 either. Like, he kind of gets stuck, I think, around the G3 stage, which is one of my more favorite variations of G anyways. But that's kind of where it leaves off as, before, he's ultimately destroyed. And, as these, and I love the idea of this huge facility that's basically majority of it's underground, where it's just this giant pit where if a part of the facility is breached, they just drop it down in this pit and basically incinerate everything. Close it up. It's so wild and over the top, and just not like a feasible way to deal with any kind of situation, but it makes for this amazing scene of them running between platforms as they're getting ready to fall, as they're being chased by the G's. So, like I said, it's way over the top, but it fits the Resident Evil universe so well, and the action it brings is just it's beautiful eye candy. It's over the top, but it's not insane. So it makes such for just a good final, boss battle. It's exactly something I would expect to see in a Resident Evil game, and I think that's why it works so well in this film. Like, I think if this was if Resident Evil came from any other media, I think this would be way too over the top. But it fits so well within the Resident Evil universe. I think it's just an amazing way to kind of end the action part, because the movie still, I think, after this point has maybe 10 minutes of runtime left. After they defeat the G, but this is kind of the action culminate, the actual hard ending of the film. Everything else is kind of just filler and tying up a couple of loose ends, but like I said, just an amazing way to end the film from here.
And just picking up on your point about the shaft, everything drops into shaft and it gets incinerated. Fredericks does make a throwaway comment that containment and quarantine efforts have drastically improved since Raccoon City. So to avoid another Raccoon City, I think this is the only way of completely containing the issue. It's just to self-destruct it, just blow it out the water. So
Speaking
again,
of water, even the sprinklers like have a combustible liquid that they sprinkle out of at the end, and I like hate to be the guy who forgets to put his cigarette out. He's walking through the door on the day somebody flips the wrong sprinkler switch, and ends up singing everybody to a very fiery early death.
It just gets completely immolated. So what then happens after that? There is a sequence involving a very emotive sequence involving Angela, her brother Curtis, and Leon as they escape. The old everybody's holding on to each other, and she manages to kind of get him off, and he falls to falls to his and perishes in his existence into the fire. We then cut to obviously there's bits and pieces of them escaping. Claire manages to escape the facility, and we finally catch up with Fredericks outside the facility, and they find him, but they only find him, if I recall, because they remembered they were listening. I don't know if it was a flash. I can't remember if it was a flashback or.
He's supposed to be meeting with a buyer. I think he mentioned that at some point.
But the most important point was Claire remembered in the background was a clock tower. She could hear the bells, so that's how they could identify where he was and kind of track him from that position. Ultimately,
that's
all this,
right, because I think they were like he was supposed to be meeting the senator, if I'm not mistaken. And that's they from that scene, that they capture Frederick. You got Leon, Ada, Claire, or excuse me, Angela and Claire, and Heineken. I think is also involved in that scene a little bit, which she pops in every. I think she's in like 2 or 3 scenes on a little handheld communication device, which I think was a really nice way to tie into Resident Evil 4. And then later on into Resident Evil 6, having Heineken as the, kind of like just pop in, pop out kind of character.
Yeah, no, agreed. And it is worth noting that the only characters that appear in this that were from other Resident Evil games was Claire, Leon, and of course Heineken. So that was it was quite nice. Again, what we do like about this is that they really try their best to reference other Resident Evil entities, but also keeping it also following its own story.
And actually, just to, like we're talking about characters that, appeared in other Resident Evil media, and I can't believe I forgot to bring this up earlier, but, earlier when we were talking about Angela being kind of a precursor to Helena Harper, and, kind of could have been the same character. In technicality, they are the same character, because Laura Bailey is actually the voice actor for both Angela Miller and Helena Harper. So
that is weird. Isn't that weird that we were talking about that? Oh
yeah,
my
and
God.
I totally had space on that till I was looking at the cast list and I saw Laura Bailey's name and I was like, oh yeah, that's right, she's also Helena. Because Resident Evil, I think it's more noticeable now because we can kind of like look up, or we've had enough Resident Evils to come out in the past couple of years where we remember it a little bit more. But Resident Evil's always kind of recycled voice actors for different roles. Like we said earlier, Roger Craig Smith did Curtis Miller as well as Chris Redfield. Laura Bailey did Angela Miller and Helena Harper. And interestingly, at the opening scenes of the movie where it shows the flashbacks of the president talking about the Raccoon City incident, he is actually the president in this movie is also voiced by Kirk Thornton, who is Kevin's voice actor from Outbreak File 2. So there's a lot of little, like there's a lot of voices in here that are from other media. And then I think, and let's see, there's a couple of voices. Michelle Ruff, who did the little Ronnie girl, is also Jill in Resident Evil Revelations, the voice actress.
Jesus.
Of course, Heineken is played, portrayed by her same voice actor. There's somebody else, I forget. Steve Bloom also does voices, and he's done a little bit of, I think, holds the Guinness Book of World Records for most voice acting roles. And Michael Connolly, Kahani, I don't know how to pronounce his last name. Anyway, he did Morgan Lansdale in Revelations and was also the Will Pharma CEO at the end of the film, but also did Barry Burton in Revelations too. So most of this voice cast has done other things outside of or things in the Resident Evil universe as other characters too. So yeah, it's just a little fun thing to know that everybody, even if they're not appearing as their character, they still have a play roles elsewhere.
So what we have next, as kind of the cliffhanger, the story's been concluded. There's a very short sequence involving Claire, Angela, and Leon as kind of concluding their story in this. But what I thought was really, really cool about it, and you got to think of the time this come out. So this was 2008. Resident Evil 4 had been out a couple of years, and this was just released before Resident Evil 5. What you're in the senator's office, and what you see is the senator appears to be dead with a newspaper on his chest. And it shows that Tricell have offered to purchase Will Farmer. Of course, Tricell, very, very heavily referenced in Resident Evil 5 in their schemes in Africa. Almost, Matt, best explain Tricell as an organisation.
Tricell?
Yeah.
Oof, man. Tricell. Well, they were the pharmaceutical company that founded the BSSA. Isn't that correct? Yeah. I think what happened was BSSA was founded by Tricell. That's why Chris and Sheva were so surprised to see their technology in Africa.
I think you're right, actually. Yeah, because he references that just before he gets to the oil, the oil refinery place. As he goes, Tricell, what on earth are they doing here? Yeah.
So I mean, at that point, go for it.
Yeah. So just looking at this, the FPC, which I believe is the Federation of Pharmaceutical Companies, so after Raccoon City, Umbrella went on trial, which I don't know how this works in this universe, because according to the general public believes that it was a nuclear disaster that wiped out Raccoon City, but somewhere the government and this big consortium of pharmaceutical companies went to punish Umbrella in a trial, essentially, and Umbrella gets found guilty, and Tricell's like, oh man, that sucks, you guys don't do bad things, and the FPC actually founds the BSAA, and Tricell stepped up as the major donor for the effort. So they didn't directly found them per se, that was the organization, the pharmaceutical organization as a whole that did it, but Tricell was the number one donors of it.
Right. Okay.
But Tricell was oh yeah, we need this bioterrorism unit, but also we love the idea of using bioweapons.
But this was good, actually, because this links Degeneration with Resident Evil 5, which was upcoming at the time, and back then I didn't appreciate or understand what the link was, but obviously now knowing where we are, how many Resident Evils have come out since, then going back and seeing the Tricell reference was really, 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 really cool. I did appreciate it.
But and it's interesting here too, because honestly, this kind of ties in a lot of points, and there's even a small tie-in, and I'll make we're going to take a huge circle to get there, but this part of Degeneration kind of, or the backstory of once we find because this is our first mention of Tricell. Tricell and its history with the BSAA actually tie all the way into Resident Evil Village, in a way. So we've got, Tricell comes in, buys Will Pharma. We see them cleaning up the Will Pharma facility, and you've got they find a piece of the Curtis G monster, carrying it off, and you got the guy with the big Tricell logo on his back. And it's heavily implied in the ending of Degeneration that Tricell had Senator Davis killed. Which kind of is interesting, because that could have been on Excella's behest, or it could have been on Albert Wesker's behest. Both of them being heavily involved in Tricell at this time. And I think timeline wise, this takes place, a couple of years, just a couple of years before Resident Evil 5. So it's very likely that Senator Davis's execution was ordered by either Excella or Wesker. But going into Tricell, they're wanting to get into BOW research, and they're looking at the more practical application of using BOWs to fight bioterrorism, is a plot point that kind of gets forgotten, because you kind of see in Resident Evil 5, your main tie-in to Tricell is Excella, who's just wanting to do whatever to get out, and get into Wesker's pants and just do what he wants her to do. But this whole idea of Tricell wanting to use bioweapons to fight bioterrorism gets brought back up in a weird way in Resident Evil Village, where the big plot twist at the end of the game is that the BSAA is deploying bioweapons into BOW zones to fight. So it's funny how this whole thing kind of, in a way, comes full circle in the lore, where the BSAA is founded by a company who wanted to use bioweapons for whatever purposes, not necessarily for nefarious purposes, but just use them in general, gets corrupted, starts using them for nefarious purposes, only for 10 years later for the company, or the anti-bioterrorism outfit that they founded, looks like it's going down the same path. Where they wanted to fight bioweapons, they're doing the right thing, and now they're kind of slipping. They're seeing the advantage of using BOWs to fight this reemergence of bioterrorism.
Yeah, they pulled an Order 66. They pulled a Palpatine, the Empire style. But yeah, that makes a lot of sense, because if that was the original intentions, then maybe they were aware of all the actions happening up until now. They knew it'd be a lengthy process, but now it's justified with them using the BOWs for good. So now the company is really doing what it originally had planned before this. So I do like that.
Yeah, so like I said, it's one of those, you have to dive deep into it, but at the same time, there's you can technically kind of make a link between Resident Evil Degeneration and Resident Evil Village. Set. When did Degeneration come out? 2006?
2008.
2008. Okay, so yeah,
Started
a year
in
before
6,
Resident Evil 5. Yeah,
and then finished.
Yeah,
Which
so
is interesting. There was an interesting process behind that. We'll get into that next there.
Yeah, so, but again, it's just an interesting thing to know that something that got brought up, almost 20 years, a long time ago, deep into the, the original lore. Because you got to think, even 2008, Resident Evil still kind of in its infancy. This is, 2008's 10-year anniversary Resident Evil.
Yeah, great.
Here we are on the 25th anniversary of Resident Evil. So, 15, almost, we're here shortly, but, going into 20 years, this is made, just in the next couple of years. So it's still interesting to see that through everything, whether, we, enjoy some of the stuff that comes out or not, there's still just these little tiny slivers that still always connect the franchise back to itself. Whether, who knows? I mean, maybe it's not intentional on Capcom's part in any means, but it still happens, and I still enjoy to see it.
Which honestly is very interesting, because now with Village in the books and everything that we've learned, endless potential for what the next game could be, for what the plot could be, for what BSSA could do. I mean, I've thought over it many times throughout the days, what we're going to see happen next, because they could do anything. They could literally do anything. But
and that's pretty much the conclusion of Resident Evil Degeneration. Obviously, Matt, we're going to bring you in a second with some of the hard facts of Degeneration, how it performed, that sort of thing. But before we get into that, what did knowing what we've spoken about here, what's our opinions on Resident Evil as a standalone feature-length Resident Evil animated film? Start with you, Matt.
Even
sorry. Yeah, go on. Start with you, Matt.
No, I just say even for some of I think its weaker points of the film, like it just works as a Resident Evil film. Like, it doesn't always have to make sense. Like, if you just watch it and don't think of like the overarching implications of everything, like it's a beautiful film. The CGI is fantastic. The voice acting is on point the whole time. The use of creatures in the film is great. Like everything works. Like, minus some of, I think, what hardcore fans can get into is nitpicky points about the plot or how it fits into the franchise as a whole. Like, those things aside, like it's just such a beautiful film. Like, the action sequences are great. I would love to play this as a modern day video game in some aspects, or at least like the last like 15 minutes of the game or the movie. I would love to have that kind of action fight with a G monstrosity. I said for me, it just works. It feels like a Resident Evil. It feels like a game the whole time you're watching it. So for me it just works. Solid 9 out of 10 for me.
And yourself, Matt?
So, I mean, for me personally, I enjoyed the film. I liked it. It was what I wanted. It's what I expected. If I think about it logically now from when I watched it, I'd probably say about an 8 out of 10 for me. The 2 points being taken away because the whole jumping around with the plot and everything. But it's what fans wanted. It was a faithful adaptation for what the game is like in that universe, what the characters are like, the creatures are like, the virus, how the world would react to this. I mean, and it's almost like the new hope of Star Wars for Resident Evil 2. If you hadn't played the first game or you didn't know about the first game, this introduction would almost feel like your version of Resident Evil 2. You meet Leon and Claire for the first time. You see the T virus and the G virus outbreak. You get some monstrous creatures, some big boss fights, some cool locations, an underground, laboratory. It literally is a swan song to 2 for those who are not initiated with Resident Evil. And for those who are, honestly, it was just a nice little treat to see us go back to Raccoon City. Well, not Raccoon City, but back to that universe, to that style of gameplay that you could put in the CGI movies. It's good. It's fun. And it's faithful. So, I mean, overall, I was very happy about it. I know most multimedia locations and people that reviewed it and companies that reviewed it thought of it to be a moderate success. Some liked it, some didn't. Others thought it was lukewarm, which is understandable. It did pretty well, though. It released for... So, just to get into the backstory of like how the movie itself was released, in Japan on... I believe it was November. They got it first. They got it for about 2-3 weeks in theaters. And in those 2 to 3 weeks in theaters, they made roughly about $44 million, which is actually very, very solid for especially a CGI movie, because they're used to releasing more animated movies in Japan as well. And then we got it on DVD not too longer in December, which it sold 1.6 million copies. And I think at total, it came out to roughly about 40 million in the US as well. So it was very successful.
And it goes back to, do we need to see, and the question is still valid now, do we need to see Resident Evil as a live action medium, or does it just work better as a CGI movie, or just simply playing the games? What's your opinion on that, Matt? Do you believe that if you were to make a direct comparison of this film, like for example, let's clear the slate. We say that in Resident Evil has never had any films or any media aside from the games. They're bringing out a new film, and you had a choice of this. We had a choice of the original Resident Evil film, come out in 2002. Paul W.S. Anderson one. What are you choosing?
That's an interesting choice to give me. Just to be honest, the first Resident Evil movie by Anderson, I liked. I thought it was good. I thought it was solid, even though it didn't have any characters that we were familiar with. I think it established a good world, a good universe. It was suspenseful. It had its little bits of action. It had a decent plot, very simple. Um, if I were to compare it to what happened with Degeneration, it's hard to say because the way the virus was brought up in the movie is completely different. Degeneration, we already know about the existence of the virus. This isn't the first outbreak. We know what it does. And with Resident Evil, the first actual live action movie, for anyone that hadn't played the games before, you were just getting introduced to the virus and what happened. So if I had to choose between Degeneration and the live action movie, I think I would probably take the live action movie first. Nothing after it, just the first one.
Of course, yeah.
Because the thing is, if we could get the perfect movie, which fingers crossed, I'm hoping here in November that this new live action movie really, really does the fans a service, that it's a good movie. We'll get a good origin. We'll get our classic characters. We'll get all the creatures, the atmosphere, the streets of Raccoon City, everything that we've wanted from the games in a live action movie. So I think, being optimistic, the games are the best way to go about it. But I think with the right director, the right vision, and the right compassion for making a movie that the fans like, that we could get what we've been wanting for years. Because we know Resident Evil's been up and down the ladder many, many times.
Not just the movies either, the games too.
Yeah. Yep.
What about yourself, Jesse? Are you very much... Do you agree with Matt in that aspect, or do you think this one stands a better chance?
To me, it's hard to remove the idea of like doing live action, because at least for its time, like up until I would say in the last 5 years or so, live action adaptations of video game have just been complete garbage. They're the like to me, like, I think there's some, live action films out there that kind of like reference a video game source material that doesn't do a terrible job at it. But up until recently, like, there just hasn't been any good video game media out there, I don't believe, outside of games or CGI films. Like, and that's going back to the 80s, like, like the Super, which, like, for me, I love the live action Super Mario Brothers with Bob Hoskins and John Leguizamo. Like, a movie is awful. It's so bad, but it just holds like such a special place to me. Like, I just absolutely love the film. For it, bar how terrible it is, but that's kind of like where video game live action adaptations were. And I will say that the Anderson film kind of set a bar there, but at the same time, like, Super Mario Brothers was awful because they tried taking the source material and then turning it into something else and trying to keep they didn't have a vision for it, and that's a lot of the problems with it. But to say that, like, I can agree with people that up until that point in 2002, when the live action Resident Evil released, like, Anderson set a standard for video game adaptations, and I don't fully disagree with that, but I don't fully agree with it either, because bar the existence of the T-virus and some of the naming choices that they did, Resident Evil isn't a groundbreaking video game adaptation film. It's just a good action zombie film. So I think to say that, if people are like, well, like, video game movies up until that point kind of sucked, Anderson came out with Resident Evil and kind of made it, started a trend of it getting better, which he really didn't, because most video game movies after Resident Evil were still trash, even his. But I can see where people are like, if you're comparing Super Mario Brothers live action to Resident Evil live action, like, well, of course, the Resident Evil live action is better and yes, maybe more faithful to the source material, but at the same time, like, I don't think it's a good video game adaptation film. I just think it's a good action film.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I don't think it's.
I mean, because like, what
Yeah.
else did we have come around that time? We had Doom and House of the Dead, which we won't talk about House of the Dead ever again.
Yeah.
But that's
And
the
like
kind of
Doom,
movies we
Doom
had.
to me, yeah, and like Doom to me, like, isn't a bad, like, dumb action flick, but
It's
other
a
than the
bad
fact
Doom
that it
movie.
goes, yeah, other than the fact that it goes first person like 5 minutes towards the end of the film, and you just happen to have a BFG in it, and it's on Mars, like that's only Doom elements there, you know. Where's Doom? Like, if I want a Doom movie, I want to see Doom guy like just fucking rain hell for an hour and 30 minutes. You know, so like that's my thing is like I think live action is important to I want to see Resident Evil in a live action form, but I want to see Resident Evil portrayed as it exists in
Yes.
live action, which is what I think we're hopefully going to get in November, because you know, again, like I don't want it to be a good movie because like it was, you know, a good zombie movie. Like I want it to be a good live action because it's the Resident Evil formula is there. You know,
I
like I
think
said, to Anderson's credit, like he made a good, you know, at least the
universe.
first, I would say two and a half Resident Evil live action films. Again, like good zombie, good action, but not true enough to the Resident Evil formula to say that it was a good thing for Resident Evil or a good, you know, Resident Evil experience. Just enjoyable action.
And
So that like, sorry,
go
go
on.
on.
No, as you were.
Oh no, I'm just saying like, so I want Resident Evil live action, and I think it's important for the franchise to have live action, but you have to know what works and not just generic cookie cutter zombie plots, which I feel like Anderson did with his film.
I think the answer to this and the reason why Degeneration works not as a better film compared to the original Resident Evil film, but as a better reference, the use of reference material is that the original film was made by Screen Gems. This had direct Capcom involvement. They controlled everything, all the outcomes in this film. Whether we have that with the new Resident Evil, I very much doubt it. So I think it's Constantine Films, isn't it? So I very much doubt that they'll have the involvement or the creative power like they did in Degeneration. But that played a big part, as Capcom had the vision for Degeneration and they implemented it. And I don't think they were afforded that opportunity in the to be honest, even if they did, Anderson had his own vision for the Anderson universe of Resident Evil, and to his credit, he done exactly what he wanted to do. It just we didn't want we didn't want it like that. We wanted it. I mean, to be honest, we wanted it more like how they did in Degeneration, just with less plot holes.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, final thoughts of Degeneration before we wrap here.
If you haven't watched it, I think you can watch it on I think you can buy it from Google, you can buy it from Amazon. Like, if you haven't seen it, get it, watch it, enjoy it. It's really fun. The follow-up films, which I'm sure we'll be talking about in podcast, you know, other episodes leading up to the release of Infinite Darkness, are also, you know, like I will say I do like kind of the story progression, especially between Degeneration and Damnation. So definitely get it, watch it. If you love the video games and you love the style of, you know, the CG style of that era, like you'll really appreciate it. The film aged really well, like still looks, you know, amazing on screen. So if you haven't seen it, definitely check it out. It's been a while since you watched it, find a way to get a hold of it again and rewatch it, because it's definitely worth it.
And it is worth noting that all of the Resident Evil animated films. I can't speak for Netflix US, but the UK version of Netflix, you can watch all of the animated Resident Evil films. So there's really no reason why you can't at least check it out if you've got a spare hour on a Sunday, or what an hour and a half on a Sunday, just to check out Degeneration. It is highly recommended. What about yourself, Matt?
Yeah, I definitely agree. I enjoy the film a lot. It's what you would expect if you're going into this for the first time and you have the history of the Resident Evil games and the Anderson movies. You can expect to enjoy it much more versus the games than the actual movies. You'll get more of that Resident Evil feel, more of that Capcom feel. It's a fun time. Enjoy it. I mean, it's definitely a good way to dip your toes into the CGI movies that follow it, because you also have Damnation and Vendetta, which both have their strong and weak points as well. But personally, they're much more enjoyable than a lot of the live action movies we've got up until now. And you'll get to see a lot of your classic favorite characters and enjoy that universe. So if you haven't, definitely check it out. Rent it, borrow it from a friend, find somewhere that's selling it on DVD or Blu-ray for $5. I'm sure there's a lot of places out there. They're worth your time.
You've got an old Nokia phone, you can also play the first person.
It is interesting.
The mobile game.
It is interesting you say that, because I've literally just loaded that in. I've literally just loaded a clip in ready to show you that as a tie-in, they did release a mobile game.
I paid I think it was $4.99. I'm trying to remember what phone I played it on. I want to say, because it wasn't. I
think it was iOS exclusive for the longest time.
No. That Resident Evil 4 mobile was iOS exclusive, but I think this was very first Android phone I had, because there's two versions of Degeneration, if I'm not mistaken. There's this more 3D-esque one, but there was also one for like feature phones that was like a first person kind of yeah, okay, so this would have been on the like early Android phones, but there was actually just kind of like a arcade style rail shooter version of this that I want to say I had on my LG Chocolate, where
Glory.
Man, that brings me back.
Yeah, like where it was just like, tiny sliver of screen. I can't remember if you walking forward was the only option you had, but it was more of like a arcade, like stop and shoot kind of experience. But I do remember also having the full version here as well. I think it was my first Android smartphone. It was like $4.99 when it came out, along with Resident Evil 4 mobile as well,
which was equally as terrible.
Mobile. Yeah,
I loved the mobile port of Resident Evil 4. It makes me sad because iPhones won't run it anymore. And I have it on my purchase history, and I can't get my phone to download it anymore.
But
it just sits there taunting me.
This version of Degeneration is very much, it's a Resident Evil 4 clone, and you just walk around an airport.
Yeah.
It has a tyrant, though. It actually has a Resident Evil 1 tyrant.
It does not, does it?
Yes, the main boss is Resident Evil 4, Resident Evil 1 tyrant, the classic tyrant.
Well, we'll have to.
It is the Degeneration port. Like, if you can figure out a way to get it running, it is a very interesting experience to play.
Oh, you are not mistaken. I'm loading it. This is fucking hilarious. Look at this bad boy. It's literally the Resident Evil 1 tyrant.
Yeah, they were like, here, take it.
That's absolutely fantastic. And this chap who's playing has just been absolutely.
Also, there is a full playthrough on YouTube if anyone has the time for that.
It's just so funny because like it plays like Resident Evil 4. Leon looks like Resident Evil 6. It has a merchant in it, but then you also have Resident Evil 1 Tyrant. It is like just a compilation of Resident Evil-ness all in one mobile game. It's a lot of fun. If you can figure out how to get it to emulate, it's definitely worth a playthrough.
Well, that's something that I didn't expect us to talk about, was the game. But yeah, yeah, I was very impressed with Resident Evil Degeneration. I'm happy they did make it, and they obviously ended up making, I believe, 2 more titles, which Vendetta and Damnation. Damnation we'll be covering afterwards. That's a completely original plot. I actually really enjoyed that one, and then Vendetta will cross the bridge when it comes. But again, all of this is in aid of Resident Evil Infinite Darkness, which is going to be coming out in July. It's going to be Netflix exclusive, and it's going to be series based. It's an animated series. So we're really excited for that. And the result of that, we're going back and we're having a look at these. So thank you to everybody who's watched or listened to today's podcast. We're extremely grateful, and shortly we'll be checking out the rest of them. So if you want to check out thoughts on Vendetta and Damnations, we'll be doing an episode. I've been Andy. This has been the Biohazard Declassified team. Thank you, Matt and Jesse, for joining us today. And hopefully we'll catch you all in our next podcast. Thank you very much.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you. Take care.